Hello and welcome to this episode of the Fluid Voice. Um, I am Ozma in the Dark still. You still rocking she/they pronouns. Now you get the opportunity to use whatever you're going to say, Christy.
I am Christy. I am mid '80s post-punk gay discoing she her. So no matter what I want to do, no matter when I wanna hold, there's something in common too. It's a sin. Short version.
I felt
Perfect.
that.
Perfect. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. He, him pronouns.
And our guest tonight, I forgot to ask if you want to change your name on the Zoom thing, and I forgot what name you have listed on stuff, because that's the sort of day this is.
Right? Listen, it happens. Yeah, my name is Alice, pronouns she, they, a 30-year-old trans woman from Portland, Oregon. Really happy to be here and chat it up about how terrible capitalism is and how much we hate it. Because listen, that's like prime leftist discourse, baby. Why not jump right in?
Yeah, well, except Perfict, who we're slowly trying to move towards social democracy if he isn't there yet.
Oh, well, I'm all
Little
in
by
favor
little
of
by little.
stages, but
It's not stages shaped like Nazi symbols.
But yeah, so like, I mean, I've described myself as either a mutualist or socialist. Socialist is probably accurate for end goals, although I always cared about what we can do now because I think accelerationism is garbage. Everyone else's opinions. Just give a brief rundown of your opinions on stuff.
I've always thought I for a long time called myself a communist libertarian, share the wealth and leave me alone. But that's unfortunately been co-opted by a group of people I do not want to associate with. So we're just going to go with socialist because that's where I am.
Perfect. What's your opinion on capitalism?
Capitalism is a little bit like salt. You need it, you've got to have it, but it's poison.
See,
So if you try and make a diet out of it, it will kill you.
I can partially agree with that, but I don't disagree about. I disagree about it's needed. But Alice, what are your initial thoughts, and we can dive into conversation.
So politically, I'm the dreaded Marxist-Leninist that your mom warned you about. But honestly,
my mom wouldn't have warned me about that. But my parents are socialists.
Oh,
Like 100%.
That's good.
That's why. Yeah, no, they talked about Marx at like a young age of mine. So like.
No, I grew up in an extremely religious and conservative family, so that never would have happened. But no, like my view of capitalism is, it's funny, there was a lyric from a Muse song that came out about a decade ago. And in like the lyric was, any system based on increased consumption and basically lives on producing more and more and more and more is unsustainable. Anything that hits the gas and it's like, we have to keep hitting the gas harder, we have to keep producing more, we have to keep making more wealth, at some point you're gonna basically go off the cliff. So they're like, the system is going to end up not just consuming itself but consuming us in the process. It's I look at it as a machine. It requires fuel to continue running. But the thing is the longer it runs, the more destruction it causes. So it's this question of like, what do we do with it? You know, do we try to wind the machine down so that way it becomes less toxic over time? We also have to ask the question, well, the machine itself is still toxic. So if we keep it around, it still has the potential for destruction. So it's sort of like the conundrum of, in this first transitional phase, what do we do? You know, it's like,
Yeah.
I think his name was Mario Savio, the man who did the speech. It's like, you got to throw your body upon the wheels, upon the gears, the levers of the machine, so that way the machine will be stopped from working at all. It's like, at some point, you got to kill it. It may not be now, it may not be in the next few decades, but at some point, that machine has to die. And that's sort of how I view it.
Okay, so like, so I tend to focus, and maybe that's part of what led me back more down this road. I won't get into my teenage rebelling against my parents and going like all libertarian, because of course I had that period of time. But yeah, so I have read bits of Adam Smith, and that was definitely after I stopped caring about benefits of capitalism. But like, even in like the base descriptions, there's an inherent problem in capitalism, which is that people can't do things if, or sorry, when people are, well, for one, when people are in desperate situations, they don't make the best decisions. But two, it's impossible. If you need something to survive, you have to pay whatever amount that they ask, and that is fundamentally a problem. That is a obvious problem in which the system is broken. So if you need a place to live, there needs to be at the very least some way to guarantee housing, because if you need a place to live, you're fucked and you have to pay whatever you have to. There needs to be a way, there needs to be more to guarantee people have food to live, because if you have to get a job to eat, there's no way you can have any say about that, about your job. Same with medical expenses. These things are absolutely need to be addressed 100%, so that corporations don't have an absolute stranglehold. And I think from then you can set up some things, more easily set up some activism things that will just kill the need for capitalism. And I think without the need for capitalism, that it'll just slowly die out. I mean, you see it with freeware software. You see it with a lot of this stuff, where it's like, yeah, people still do stuff that's beneficial without needing extra financial effort to do that.
Well, one of the things is, and this is a big problem with capitalism. We effectively live in a post-scarcity world that is enforcing artificial scarcity, and that becomes unsustainable for a large portion of humanity. So
are you saying the apartments in which they get they've been losing money because they haven't had any tenants because they kicked them out? You're saying that's not sustainable?
Absolutely unsustainable.
Yeah. Okay. Unsustainable growth. One of the elegant ways I've heard it put is that if you allow an organism unchecked growth, eventually it dies in its own waste. That it's an unsustainable system. And if you just look at companies and you just run little models where, doesn't matter what they're making, if they're trying for continual growth, it kills them.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we can look at what's happening in Texas right now or what was happening a few weeks ago is a perfect example of this. I did a video on it recently and basically went into how, if you look at ERCOT, the main provider for Texas energy grid, the way they have it set up is that essentially they they are able to take this small amount of power and say, okay, this is the maximum output we have. There's nothing they can do beyond that. So if there's a need for more power than what they're willing to supply, there are blackouts that are caused. But it's not because there's a lack of power supply. It's because they place these artificial limits on how much people can use. And like the consequences we saw were there were people who were dying in their own homes because their oxygen equipment wasn't working, because they literally froze to death. There were water mains bursting, people who still currently don't have power or clean running water. This one decision to cap the power supply in one place has all of these cascading effects. And it's one thing that Mao talked about the contradictions of capitalism, where as you start reaching more of late stage capitalism, you see the sharpening and the increasing of these contradictions. So what you'll see is like sort of the two groups in society. You have the people who actually control the power, they're the ones who control the wealth, and you have the rest of the people. The people in power are pulling more and more of that power away to the point where they're essentially the ones who dictate whether or not the lights stay on or not. So it's this very tiny group of people who is dictating this to, and like everyone else, millions upon millions upon millions of people. And it's all in the drive to continue producing more profit. And the thing about companies and corporations is if they want to increase their profits, they will take whatever measure they feel necessary to increase those profits. So, you know, this time we saw the power companies cut power off for millions of customers for weeks on end. Who's to say something worse might not happen the next time there is a historic storm like this?
Well, I mean,
it helps here in Buffalo that we have that our power grid was essentially designed and it's expandable over 100 years ago when public utility meant public utility, because you know Nikola Tesla basically designed one of the things. So we're almost entirely hydro from the Niagara Falls. You may have heard of it. And hydro, nuclear, and wind power. All of which we have, you know, we have wind in abundance. So
yeah,
our electric bill.
Yeah, I saw the
so fucking tiny. It's astonishing. And I hear about other people's electric, and I just go, why don't you do something about this? You have the capacity there.
In Texas, the problem was the dual thing. The state allowed the power company to use a billing practice that sounds kind of reasonable, but has a deep flaw with it. And they combined that with deciding to cut themselves off from the rest of the nation's power grid so that they could deregulate in the idea of allowing the invisible hand of the market to control the regulation. But why would the power company invest money to winterize their facilities so they'll operate in cold weather when all that does is insulate them from greater profit that they made in a couple of days, a year's worth of profit, because they couldn't make any power? And those they were supplying with were paying, they could charge 50 times the going rate.
Yeah, and the invisible hand of the market always annoys me because it's absurd. It's sort of like saying, hey, you know who could take on the U.S. militarily? You know, Ghana. If they cared about it enough, they could just, you know, make everything change. And it's like, no, that's not how it works. Like, there's different amounts of power and influence, and money makes a giant difference. And we've got effectively swords and shields, and they've got nuclear bombs. It is a decent explanation for the amount of difference that $1 billion is versus like 100K even.
Well, also part of the invisible hand of the market and all that is a social thing that used to be much more prevalent. In Gone with the Wind, Rhett Butler was doing everything he could to make sure that his child would be accepted in polite society, because he had gotten his money by the dirty, old-fashioned way of earning it.
Well, no.
And
slavery.
The
dirty, old-fashioned way of slavery.
No. That wasn't Rhett Butler.
That wasn't Rhett. That was Scarlett.
Oh,
yeah, Scarlett did the slavery.
Okay.
He was a gun runner during the war.
Oh, okay.
And a hero during the war, and therefore, then
he actually put some amount of effort, but I mean, also for
so the point is that he was the point is that he was trying to do that, and then later we had Joseph Kennedy, who he made his fortune as a criminal. He was a bootlegger, and that's where the Kennedys' money came from. And he was determined that that one of his kids could be president, that they were not going to be excluded from that. And I think that that's a progress. I think that's a good thing.
I mean,
but there was a time that people who were on who were part of the power company at this period in time basically would never hold a decent job again.
Yeah, but
they'd never be in charge of anything because society would totally shun them. And that reputation would follow them even if they moved to another city. They would be shunned. We don't do that anymore.
Well, yeah,
so there isn't that as a break on them.
But
they don't go, I will be a pariah. My children will be a pariah. I cannot do this thing.
Yeah, Martin Shkreli was a particular case because he had such a punchable face.
I mean, if you're talking...
He really did. Oh, my God.
Yeah, but, people shouldn't have to get rich through a bootleg campaign so that their children have a chance at being the president. That's not how society
he wasn't trying to make
work.
it so his children would be the president. He just earned his money in a socially unacceptable way. He then managed to go straight.
That's almost the only way to make any significant amount of money.
How else are you going to become rich like the Kennedys? Yeah, no kidding. But
yeah, that's a big problem, though. Every person you've heard that pulled themselves up from their bootstraps, chances are they had rich relatives pulling them up.
Bill Gates was a criminal. He engaged heavily in
he also
unfair business practices that were illegal, and he continually just went, I'll suffer the lawsuits, and I'll fight you in court, and I'll spend more money than you will. And
he also had rich parents too.
But yes,
important detail.
He did this from he quit college and did this all from his backyard. He also had his parents pay for college, so there wasn't really a debt, if I recall correctly. And it's definitely something where there are so many more resources if you're financially well off. I mean, that's same with the General Motors person as well. I can't think of everyone, but
I've stirred the hornet's nest enough with that first point. I want to get to something about, it's my what I consider to be my libertarian reasoning and background that leads me to these things, okay? If you look at all the practical studies,
hornet's nest. It's always fun to play with hornets, okay?
If you look at the practical studies and what we can tell about things, if you just give people resources, they don't become lotus eaters. They don't just sit down and go, well, I don't need to do anything. My rent is paid.
Yeah,
they go out and do things. They're industrious. And if you just make sure their basic needs are met, they become really industrious. And you get more out of society. There is more producers all over the place, and it's just how it works. It's that
if you're talking about
that's sort of like, sorry.
I was just gonna say if you're talking about from objective level something.
I think this is a really good example of one of the strongest contradictions within capitalism itself, where you could say, hey, you know, if we paid everyone's student debts off, that would greatly stimulate the economy. People would now have more financial freedom, and you'd see all these like really positive effects, but they're just sitting there like, but my profits. It's like they can't disconnect that, you know? So like certain businesses who could start using better business practices, but don't, because my bottom line, it's like this thing where they keep shooting themselves in the foot over and over and over again, because it's even in the name, capitalism. The whole purpose is to preserve capital, whereas socialism is to preserve the social relations, the people. Any system that continues to advocate for money over everything else, you're going to see it keep hitting dead ends like that, where they could do good things. They could. Will they? Nope. Because that sweet cash is just, they can't part with it. They can't do it.
I something I never talked about, and I probably should more, is I was born into two rich families, so to very, actually, well, very wealthy and pretty wealthy. My mom got cut off for reasons, as did I. My entire inheritance from both of those was $800. The with which I bought a dishwasher because I wanted a dishwasher.
Probably a good investment.
Yeah,
I said that's a good investment.
yeah, it's so I've been both rich and poor, and I mean I've been homeless, so it's kind of like I've seen all the angles from that. And to be perfectly honest, there isn't a heck of a lot of difference between being rich and being poor, other than just having to worry more as a poor person. And I then became reasonably well off on my own, which was eaten up in $100,000 worth of medical bills in the early aughts. So all of it is just, you know, and now I'm on Medicaid, which means I can't make more than $1,300 a month.
Yeah.
Which is ridiculous.
Yeah, it really shows like the whole structure of the US as I see it is this inverted pyramid. So the people at the very top of society are the ones who are given the most privileges. You know, they're the ones who can get healthcare easily taken care of. For the most part, they don't have to worry about falling into poverty. A lot of people in government can happily break law after law after law. No one ever goes after them. There's little accountability. They're not taxed, which is crazy. So as you see the pyramid go down through society to the people who make less and less and less, you see more and more of those things being taken away. And the biggest thing is political mobility, sort of your ability to affect actual substantial and lasting change on society, on the government. As you go down that social ladder, you have less and less and less and less. And it's only when we get to like the petty bourgeois, so like white middle class people and up, that's when you have people who can actually have a lasting effect on society. But it's like a more ideal society would be just flip the pyramid. So that way the vast majority of people don't have to worry about going into debt or dying because they had a medical thing they had to have taken care of. Like the more I look at this country, it's just like so little makes sense to me. You know, I'm like, just why are people being forced to go into a lifetime of debt just to educate themselves? Why is it also that like you get that degree and then all the jobs are like, oh, by the way, if you have 4 to 10 years experience, we'll actually hire you. And you're like, I just got out of college. What? There's so many of these contradictions within it that it's just like, it's not functional, you know? And it's because that pyramid is upside down. The people at the top are the ones who actually get what the rest of us should be getting, But that I think is one thing that capitalism definitely fuels is, you have your wealthy oligarchs, you have the warmongers, CEOs of companies like Raytheon who are helping to supply imperialist wars overseas. Because all of that wealth and power is concentrated right to them, essentially it's like they become the ones who run a country. Only they're the ones who are allowed to have any say whatsoever. And I think just that by itself, if you flip the pyramid, things can actually right themselves. But the way the structure, the whole system is set right now, it's there to disadvantage people like us from the very beginning.
Well, yes. I mean, 100%. I mean, the fundamental aspects for a lot of this is there is some very major cultural problems that just need to be gotten rid of, and that's hard to do when you don't have significant amounts of power. And obviously, you don't want to set things up so that there's another fascism. Depending on how any sort of change is made, because obviously if people are desperate enough, moves towards fascism. I mean, that's its own thing, but like the cultural attitudes that if you do major things in society, you get praise, as if that is some, regardless of how much resources and helpful aspects they're doing. It's sort of survival of the fittest without regarding what sort of advantages people get by, who their parents were.
Yeah. Spencerianism.
Sorry, what?
Spencerianism.
Unsarianism?
Spencerianism.
Oh, Spencerianism. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wait, what's Spencerianism?
It was Spencer who coined survival of the fittest. So
Oh, okay.
that's why.
Gotcha.
So Spencerian capitalism became big vogue in the just before the turn of the century. Teddy Roosevelt did the trust busting. It's long. It's history stuff, but it should also be paid attention to. I'm not entirely fond of the way one side of my family made their money, which I won't talk about. But I mean, it wasn't illegal, but it wasn't ethical to me. But
unlike bootlegging, which is sort of the opposite.
Yeah.
It was illegal, but we really don't consider it unethical.
No.
Yeah, because it is essentially, it's bootlegging is stealing capital for other people's use. It's essentially fighting against the owners of capital, although sometimes through with the collateral damage of various people who are selling what capital they can get. Socialist terminology.
Smuggler is mostly what he was doing. He was a smuggler. He smuggled from Canada.
Yeah, but smuggling drugs from Canada would be incredibly ethical, I would argue.
I have nothing to say on it.
Yeah.
As someone who lives a couple of minutes away from Canada.
So, I can neither confirm nor deny that Christy could use an extra few bucks. So if you need it, no, I'm just kidding. I'm not good.
That I wouldn't do. But I've had to go to Canada for a prescription once because I couldn't afford it in the US.
Yeah, I have the middle class privilege of having parents that accept me and were born in the boomer era, so I was able to do something that I wouldn't have done in if my parents weren't middle class, because they went to a lawyer to make sure the car insurance paid for my hospital bill because of the car that hit me as a pedestrian. if I didn't do that, it would have just been a lot of hospital hounding, because I was getting letters like every day from the hospital asking me to pay them after traumatic brain injury, when my brain's already not in the best place. It's arguable levels of any ability to consent when it comes to like the first month. I was in the hospital for like 2 weeks from the traumatic brain injury. I signed a paper to go to the other hospital. I have no memory of what it said. You know, something about traumatic brain injuries. But yeah, no, I would have been probably like 10K in debt from the hospital. If it weren't for the fact that my parents got lawyers involved. But that, like, if you're a poor family, that's not necessarily going to be the first instinct.
I had to assign a quarter of my royalties for several years in order to pay for everything that happened. So.
Yeah, I'm kind of in a similar situation because my granddad, who was born in the 20s, made enough at the time that he was able to pay off both my and my sister's student loans. So that's one thing where I'm grateful for that, but I also have to recognize that, anytime I'm doing an analysis on the living conditions of modern millennials and people who are Gen Z, I have to remind myself, hey, a lot of these kids have student debt on their back. You don't. It's good to be sensitive to that. And like
I
I
have
am
student
paying off.
debt.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where it's like the fact that I don't have it and I'm still struggling because I have a surgery I'm paying off. It's just like it really shows you how fucked a lot of us are, the fact that like these are conditions that do not have to exist. This does not have to be a thing where we have to spend 10, 20, 30 years or more of our lives paying off things that should just be a public service. It's like it really is a wake-up call, because I grew up in East Texas, and the culture there is, imagine what you saw at CPAC, except 95% of people actually believe that seriously.
Well, I mean, most of the people in CPAC, I'm sure, believed it seriously too.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's exactly why I say that. But like that's what the socio-political environment was like for me, is I was surrounded by people who were like, no, just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. The government's not there to take care of you. You got to take care of you, and all of these other things. And I honestly didn't really realize until I turned 25 and I got out of Texas, and I actually kind of sat back and I started looking from like a more objective point of view on how things are functioning in society right now. I was like, wow, there's a lot they don't tell you. Wow. And it's like there are these things that should be really obvious to a lot of people, but I think there's a lot that can be said about the conditioning that our society does to so many people, who they'll hear about homeless people and they're like, oh, it was their choice. No realization whatsoever that homelessness and poverty are purely the products of the system we live in. 99.9% of the time, those things are not personal choice. They are barriers that were put in our place without our say, but they fully believe that it's this individuality that causes it. It's personal choice that causes it. The system can't possibly be the thing at fault, so it's got to be everything else. And it's like, once you're aware of that and you start hearing people who still go on about like, well, maybe that it's the person's fault that they got laid off, or like, well, why can't they find a job? Why are you living off the government? Like all these kinds of things. Like the more you learn and then you go back and listen to them, you're just like, what world are you living in? But it's understandable why so many people are sort of trapped in that bubble.
I find conservative Christian of that sort to be a really odd thing, when they have both a just world theory to explain why people fail. I mean, that's very Calvinist, I guess, but they also this is a fallen world, so if this is both of these things, they cannot exist at the same time. Which is it's a stray thought. Sorry.
Well,
I've been thinking a lot about just world theory. So.
Well, yeah. I mean, the one of the things is critical theory is not like really taught a lot, and the ability to step back and actually look at what goals are is not taught. And if you're just like constantly instinctively going, yeah, this feels right, because you're just like, I don't have time to think about this, I'm trying to survive. You end up oftentimes repeating the various aspects you were taught were how the world is in like elementary school or high school, whereas you're oftentimes taught more about how to solve problems in school past high school, and so it's a lot more likely for some amount of critical thinking to develop. And yeah, because if you look at the goals, if you're just like, if you take a course in ethics or whatever, like I did in what do you call it? Community college. Because, I mean, community college is the cheapest of colleges. And,
that doesn't mean they're bad. It just means that they're focused on education.
It doesn't mean they're bad. It just, the fact of the matter of, like, because I could only get 2 years of things. So there was limitation on what sort of amount of education I could get. Now, that being said, yes, if you step back and look at the ethics of it, and you're just like, I want less people to die and have a miserable life, then everything about the capitalist system is and antithetical to that, because the capitalist system is not based on that. It's based on a sort of might makes right attitude. If you're strong, well, there must be a good reason you're strong, and therefore you're the person I should believe when it comes to situations, regardless of, what sort of qualifications they have. Like, you shouldn't be listening to Kamala Harris's opinions on anything outside of maybe police work. And even that, she is a DA who continued a horrible system, so it's not she is not necessarily an expert on that. I mean, not to say that obviously there is some things that she has promoted that are good, because I mean that happens too, but we need to even if we can't get more, I'm of the opinion that we need to fight for more.
I want to just throw one thing in before, because which is just going back. It's pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, or pulling oneself up by your own bootstraps, is initially an anti-capitalist thing, because if you actually think about it for half a second, it's an impossible thing to do.
Yeah.
It's a physically impossible thing to do, and it was used as a capitalist slogan, and much, but things sometimes weirdly twisted. It's like good fences make good neighbors was sarcastic. It's meant to be sarcastic.
Yeah,
it was a poem
Monopoly
about a
was
guy
anti-capitalist because it was against monopolies, because it was trying to show how broken stuff was with monopolies. I hear far too many conservative people misuse the famous post-Holocaust poem about first they came for the communists.
I hate it when they do that so much.
I do too.
God.
I was born and raised Jewish. I learned that poem.
Nothing makes me want to throw my phone faster than that. Especially after finding out my great grandparents were Jewish, and I was like, "Wait, my white conservative Christian family didn't bother to tell me that. Interesting. I wonder why." Yeah, no, what we were talking about as far as capitalism, though, if y'all haven't read it, I'm reading a book right now called Labor and Monopoly Capital by Harry Braverman. And amazing, amazing book so far. And it goes into how the entire system of capitalism basically perpetuates every part of society, from your jobs to your education to social relations. Like everything is rooted in capitalism. And I think when we were talking about education, that's super, super important, because what the schools are doing is they're not teaching kids to be free thinkers. They're not teaching kids to, think for yourself, take everything, like be critical about what it is people tell you. Don't believe someone just because they're in a position of authority. They're not going to do that because they need these kids to be raised to essentially be, as this book puts it, is that humans, workers, children are all seen as automatons, as machines. And what those running the system do is they put things in place, they set commands that will cause those machines to automatically do those things. And they tune it well enough to make sure that there's very, very, very few errors in the system. Whenever people grow up, they think a certain way, they get certain kinds of jobs, they live certain kinds of lives, they produce certain amounts for the capitalists, and then they die. It's like this finely oiled machine. So I think it's really interesting talking about the education part of it, because that was another big thing for me, because I remember my high school history classes, for example, praised Christopher Columbus. They hailed him as a national hero. Of course, then I read people's history of the United States and I actually understand, oh my God, this man was a fucking monster. But
I am surprised, by the way, sorry to
No, you're good.
I'm surprised that Christopher Columbus was not super hardcore praised in my high school. I'm like 35. Maybe it's because I live in Minnesota, but because they talked about a small amount of indigenous stuff. So Christopher Columbus didn't get the high praise. He still got too much praise because he was an awful person. But yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh, it wasn't indigenous stuff really that was Christopher Columbus's thing. I mean, he didn't even hardly deal in the Americas. He was just a monster in he ended up on an island where he just had slaves shipped in and he just literally worked them to death. That was his economic plan.
And he didn't even sail to the right place. He was like, I found the East. Nope.
Well, yeah, and the worst thing about that is, because I think in elementary school I probably was still taught the bullshit of that people didn't know the Earth was round. No, people knew the Earth was round since the Greeks. Christopher Columbus just didn't believe that the Earth was round, and he was like, he believed the Earth was round, but he didn't believe.
He didn't think it was that big.
Yeah, he didn't believe that there would be a large country. And honestly, the Greeks were just not the Greeks weren't that specifically. I mean, the Greeks already measured how big the world was, so that they had a good calculation. They just most of the people were like, "Don't do that. It might just be ocean, and you might just be sailing to your death."
Hey, y'all, it's almost like anti-intellectualism is kind of not a good thing and leaves death and destruction in its wake. I don't know. It's just me.
Could be.
You're getting your Mediterranean countries mixed up still, but it's the Egyptians as who the Arabic Egyptians had within a few miles of how big the Earth was.
Oh, okay. Well, maybe it's one of those things where I was taught more about European countries when it comes to some mathematical aspects, because there's a lot of racism.
Yes, I mean, I was educated in the 70s, so yeah. I mean, thankfully in a mixed neighborhood in Brooklyn, but yeah. If it's got an AL at the beginning of it, it was an Arab invention, such as algebra, which is how you figure out the circumference of the goddamn earth.
Yeah, and
Put a stick in the ground and you
yeah,
measure
because
the shadow.
maybe
But
I was
can,
taught it was like the Greeks.
Student loans is.
Oh, go on. You were more
I
on
was
topic.
going to. Student loans are particularly an example of where we misapply capitalism. The idea is that you need higher education in our modern technological society in order to be a productive member. This is a virtual necessity, which isn't really the case, but it has its merits, and that it is sort of a requirement. And if it's sort of a requirement, but we can't get the loan people making loans to make loans to students because there's too little chance of their getting a good return on their investment. So we make things where their loans are guaranteed and the student can't escape debt by simply declaring bankruptcy or any of those conventional means. Is tattooed on them. They owe this debt and they cannot escape it. And this allows the companies, and what you end up with is a system where the company is, the loaners are allowed to make loans, which means that they are acquiring a portion of your investment in your future. Only a portion of your investment in your future actually goes towards making your future. Part of it goes towards satisfying the person loaning. And now we've developed a method of pooling wealth amongst the wealthy.
Wait,
It's a system of taking money out of the populace at large and pooling it into the top 10%.
wait, are you suggesting that there are capitalists who pool wealth, and that wealth inequality is a major problem that's only growing?
Well, I'm saying that if you're designing a system, this is a major problem with it that you've designed in.
No, that's a major problem, like I mentioned. So like for you to even use capitalism as Adam Smith or whoever wrote that book, I only read like the first couple chapters, and the first couple chapters were interesting or whatever. It's not like the worst written book, but there's a fundamental problem with if there's supposed to be accountability because people can choose what jobs they can go to, then you can't make jobs a requirement to survive. Because if you make jobs a requirement to survive, you can't pick and choose because you need it to survive. And that is just fundamental problem right there. For people to make good decisions, like you could potentially set up certain mutualistic aspects so long as people don't need the capitalism to survive. And like that's an absolute no. That's bad, and it's only going to be that loophole part is only going to be constantly exploited. You need, like, it's easier to have a union if you don't need the job to live. Mm-hmm. It's really easy to fight for good rights. It's really easy to like fight for shit if you getting fired just means you can still just have a nice meal at home, or even like if it's a lower standard meal because you're not working, like that's still worlds better. I think that if we can get to that point, I think capitalism will just die out because because people won't see the point.
Yeah, I mean, in so many ways, capitalism really, to me, is fundamentally antithetical to both human nature and like the well-being of people, because capitalism itself has to survive on exploitation. It has to survive on exploitation. If it doesn't have people to exploit, it falls apart and dies. And it's also one of those things where capitalism, white aristocracy, racism, and fascism in so many ways are all tied together. Because if you look at whenever the imperialists back in Europe were wanting to expand the empire. They were wanting to expand west. They started using tremendous amounts of slave labor because they were like, well, there's a lot of wealth we'd like to collect. We want to make this territory into a commodity. We want to own it ourselves. We want to profit off of it, but we don't have the people. So how do we get people we know we can use as a means to an end for ourselves? And it's this inherently discriminatory practice where they're like, well, there are these groups of people in Africa that we as these superior white men feel we can manipulate just right and make them do what we want. Whenever they came to America and the slave trade started, it was a booming business, and especially in the Civil War, you had people defending it because they were like, well, this brings us prosperity, so why in the world would we stop doing this? And you look at what's happening nowadays with Amazon, where there are workers who are trying to unionize because there are workers in conditions where they're either having to pee in bottles or they're developing medical conditions just because the work environment is so stressful. It doesn't let them just be people. Like, people are increasingly more and more being treated not as human beings, but just machines, things to exploit. Whenever you die, they turn and grab the next one and keep going.
And it's also not just Amazon places, but food shipping as well. Is like another place where you have like there's major COVID outbreak, and people being forced into a situation where peeing in bottles was the best option. I watched something recently about that, and I just realized now that was John Oliver.
One of the things that this last year showed was the inability of capitalism itself to come up with to deal with a world-changing crisis. I mean, the companies had to kind of not be companies, sort of. I don't know. There was a way I meant to put it that has completely escaped my mind, and nothing else is coming except an old Peter Schilling song. Who the hell knows why that's there?
And this is a problem with a lot of this involves there are people are taught in such a way that they have to be put in a position, and I know people don't think about it, but it's we're okay with these people dying so long as we feel like we put in a marginal amount of effort. Like, there are people with disabilities. I know definitely in Britain there are people with disabilities who starve to death because of the system that's set up. I know here, if you mention you have a disability in paperwork, companies can pay you less than the minimum wage. And
it's been startling, like how much eugenicist talk I'm hearing from normal people, because I'm autistic. And even though
everyone's autistic here,
hell yeah, I really am in good company. Oh my god, this is great. But
this is why we're going straight to the facts, and we're talking about real stuff.
Exactly. Thank you. This is how things should be discussed, y'all. Come on, get with us. But no,
it's only a disability because of capitalism.
You're not wrong, though.
I know.
But no, it's like there are people in American society right now who would look at me, and if they know I'm autistic, this thought would pass through their mind of like, well, as long as you get it first, not me, that's totally fine. And I'm just like, excuse me. It's like, again, capitalism being inherently ableist. The job discrimination amongst disabled people is just, it's disgusting and heartbreaking. And like, whenever I was hired the job I'm working at right now, like 6 years ago, I didn't disclose at the location I was hired at that I was autistic, because that was back in East Texas, and there's an extreme stigma towards people who struggle with mental illness in Texas. It's actually really, really sad that they're still so far behind. But I couldn't say anything because I was like, if I say anything, they're going to see me as being less able to produce than more able people or privileged people. So, like, again, that's another part of it. The fact that this system means that people like ourselves who just think and process a little bit differently, but other than that are totally normal people, you know, is just, it's wild the more and more that you become aware of that. And you realize, especially with the pandemic now, there are people who look at us and genuinely feel we're less worthy of life than them. And that's just
Yeah.
like seeing that as out in the open as it is right now is something I still struggle to wrap my head around.
Yeah. And I'm suddenly thinking of that I need to read more of some of the stuff that Helen Keller said later in her life, because I've heard it is wonderful, because she was a suffragette, and she was for abled rights, and like I don't remember if she was anti-capitalist, but it wouldn't surprise me, especially given the time period as well, because capitalism was showing to some degree how awful it was. But as someone I've talked with before pointed out, if accelerationism worked, it would have worked around the turn of the century, because everything was worse for everyone, and it, you know, didn't fix anything directly.
I mean, there are a lot of reasons I love living in the future, and I just call it, I'm over 50, so, you know, to me, this is living in the future.
Yeah.
I mean, being trans and having to go back in the closet in the late 70s, early 80s, being autistic and having, I was always the one put in the corner and left off to, you know, do my schoolwork by myself.
Yeah.
And, you know, beaten up by everybody. So at least the social awareness is better now.
It's society. Society has been changed by the internet. It's the internet has made this change, because people like trans people, where they are a small percentage, 2.5%, is a good estimate on the population. That's a very small percentage. But they can, instead of feeling isolated and going, I'm the only person in my whole community, and therefore I kind of have to keep it a secret, they can become open about it. And not only can they be open, it encourages them to be open in their normal, regular life, not just their online life.
Yeah.
And suddenly they find out that they aren't the only trans person on their block, much less in their city.
Which I am most certainly not. I wrote this on Twitter the other day, a version of this, but at the very lowest estimate, 0.6% of the U.S. is trans. At the absolute lowest, the people who have blue eyes and red hair is 0.17%.
So what we're saying
people not telling me that my blue hair, my blue hair, I keep saying blue hair, my red hair and blue eyes are not some kind of deviant. Well, they used to when I was a kid, but you know, some kind of deviant thing that I. Why is that? I don't know. I had a point, and again I've lost it.
Sorry, I picked up your point. It's that it shouldn't be an issue, because it shouldn't be any more of an issue than being trans shouldn't be more of an issue than red hair. It's more common than red hair, so why make it a bigger issue than red hair?
Yeah, I can definitely speak to just how much like Twitter alone has changed my sense of place within the community, because
Yes. Sorry.
I started using Twitter before I came out. And I remember throughout that entire journey, I started meeting like more and more and more people in the community. And suddenly I realized that I'm surrounded by so many people like us on a daily basis that I never would have known were there. Never would have known they were there had I not had this platform. And it's like pretty much my entire friend circle now is queer. And like a huge chunk of that are trans people. And they're some of my closest friends in the world now, and like it really does feel like a family. Like it really, really does. And that's what I love about it,
Yeah.
is, you know, we function like a family. We have our agreements, we have our disagreements, we have our you know, more out there characters, but it's what makes us us, you know. And it's honestly, I think it's been a tremendous help for me in my journey, because whenever I first came out, I identified as a strictly binary trans woman, but as I got a bit older, I started meeting a lot of non-binary people, a lot of like non-binary femmes, trans masc people, people who are just all over the place. And I was like, oh my God, there's so much more. And I realized that I'd been sticking a little too closely to something that didn't completely feel comfortable, but I only knew that little tiny circle of people at the time. And now, you know, I realize calling myself like a non-binary femme, using both she and they, it is perfect for me. And it's because like I have this community to like learn and grow from, that I was able to get to this point and like can now be happily open. Like I'm completely comfortable being myself in public. And that never would have happened before this. And it's just like, I think it's really cool that people in the community now have this tool, and it's helping to increase our like visibility in society to such a large extent. And obviously that does come with, you know, conservatives, certain types of Christians, you know, coming after us. Like both my parents threw the Bible at me for hours after I came out to them. One of them having the gall to say, well, didn't you ever consider how this would make me feel? And I'm just like,
Oh.
no, because this isn't fucking about you. Why would that be a thought
Yeah.
in my head? You know, that's unfortunately, there are going to be those in society who are resistant to stay at pace with the movement of the rest of it. But that's just part of it. It's what happened during the era of Stonewall. It's what happened in the decades following that. Now, this community is the one who's getting a lot of shit from like Republicans, certain types of Christian folk, but like we have this platform, we have this community now where I feel like we have a lot more ability to fight back against that. We
Yeah.
have a like so much more support behind us, that I think that's only going to grow as time goes on.
Yeah. And
How much Twitter was important to me, because I had decided in March that I had to come out, and I kept trying to be. And I actually asked someone relatively random who I didn't really know
March
if
like
it was okay for
2019,
me to come
wasn't
out.
it?
If it's 2018.
Oh, 2018.
I
was when
wound
it
up.
came out. Okay.
Yeah, I wound up asking someone that I barely you know, barely had any interaction with, if it was okay to come out.
Oh.
I know, which sounds weird, but I needed somebody to tell me it was okay.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, no,
And
yeah, that's a mood.
Yeah, no, especially growing up in an area of the country that is so repressive when it comes to like the idea of the gender binary is so strong in Texas that say you're assigned male at birth and you're in elementary school, if you show any signs whatsoever of like any divergence from this stereotype of a boy, everyone comes after you. And I was picked on constantly by everyone. Like boys would be like, "What are you gay? Why do you act like a girl? Why do you act feminine? That's weird." And at the time, like I'm like, I don't know. I'm trying to figure that out myself. Why are you attacking me for this? But it was one of those things where like I didn't feel safe even just coming out. But I felt like if I even thought about why I felt this way and I actually faced it, just that act alone would put me in danger of even more physical harm, of more ostracization. So,
Yeah.
like, especially with my family, hearing how they talked about the queer community when I was younger, it was regular for them to either use slurs or just talk like very, very negatively about us. So I realized, like, well, fuck, this means I can't be out to my own family. I would love my family to accept me, but this seems to be very clearly how they see me. And I felt the same way about everyone else around me. And it took until I was 28. So this was coming on about 2.5 years ago. I finally got to a point where I was like, I can't do this to myself anymore. I was just like, this is torture. I'm trying to be something for someone else. And I realized the whole time I was scared of disapproval. I was scared of putting myself in a position where I would be more at risk for discrimination just for being myself. And it held me back from accepting myself. But I finally sat down and I was like, I'm not happy. I was like, I hate that this is where we have to be in society, that just
Yeah.
being yourself opens you up to that kind of treatment. But I was like, I was kind of the same way, Christy, honestly, where I had to tell myself that it was okay to do that. It's like I had to give myself permission to make that decision for myself. And that's really the biggest reason why I decided to move to Portland. I was like, I am never going to be able to be out like I want to be if I stay in this part of the world. So I was like, you know what? Let's just throw a Hail Mary and go for it and see what happens. And like now I have the best chosen family I could have asked for here, and I'm actually living as myself. So that's, but it took me telling myself, hey, it's okay to do this. You need to do this for yourself. Otherwise, you're gonna be in pain for the rest of your living years. Is it really worth it to do that to yourself? And I was finally just like, you know what? No. And I hate that for some people it takes longer than others. And there are people who have families or live in places where it's just like everyone around them is completely antagonistic to them. But I also think that's the beauty of this community, is the fact that so many of us have come through things like this, and now we're as openly ourselves as we are. We're as outspoken about these things. We're as vibrant as we are. I'm just like, I think that really speaks to the character of people in this community. The fact that we persevere so much and we've turned out to just be, beautiful, wonderful people. Like I love that so much.
Yeah. Two things I wanted to say.
Yeah. No, I'm sorry. It was just to give you a tiny, very tiny bit of background. February 12th, 2018, which was my birthday and my child's birthday and my mother's birthday, which is confusing enough. My child came out to me as trans, and it thought I was disapproving, but it had nothing to do with that. It was more, you're doing something I was able to do briefly for being second in the early 80s, and tried so many times after that it was impossible. And also that same night I had a first date with a trans woman. Just a thing. It just happened to be. It's the coincidence of epic proportions. So of things happened all at once. Of course, my last two bandmate writing partners since the late 80s have been trans people, so trans women. I'm unfortunately I'm the binary one. I'm sorry. I don't mean to mess up.
I'm busy
current.
being girl flex.
But,
I mean, Front Think Perfect's pretty binary as a cishet, as the token cishet guy. No,
Well, I fit in a binary category. I don't believe the world is binary. I haven't for a very long time.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're like actually a good ally. that I genuinely appreciate a lot. But that said, I did want to talk about two things. One, middle school, because I mean, even though I didn't have as bad of an experience, because my parents weren't like actively hateful, but it was very much like an unknown, because like it was one of those things where I just didn't know. I didn't know for sure, and it's not like they weren't oppositional, so it wasn't obvious to me. But in middle school, I made sure to straighten my wrists so I wouldn't be seen as gay. Definitely thing I consciously did. Christy, I'm guessing you did too.
Oh my God, how much energy I put into not being feminine. It's amazing.
No, there's a lot of energy, but also like, so I didn't I realized I was trans when I was like 21, but like I'm like 35 now, so we're talking like 2007 or whatnot. So like I mean my parents were, I mean, I say middle class, on the lower end of middle class, so it's not like we had super fancy computers and internet. I mean, we had internet, it was just really basic, and I didn't like use the internet much. Or no, wait, did we? I can't remember. We had sporadic amounts of internet. But yeah, it was just
America's kind of lost the middle class. When you find out what middle class really means is where it's where you live and how you live has started to become disassociated from your paycheck.
Mm-hmm.
You go, well, a lot of people who call themselves middle class are not.
Yeah.
That we don't have a middle class. We have an upper working class, and then you go to super rich.
Yeah, no, that is true, because obviously upper working rich doesn't own any capital at all.
Even people who own a business, where they live is dependent on the salary they pay themselves at that business. If they were unable to manage their business and had to pay somebody to do that, they'd have to move. They couldn't afford to live where they're living.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a really complicated mess of a system. At some point, for some reason, I can't remember what was being talked about. I was just gonna like blurt out some of the people, because like I still have friends from high school. So like I've got two friends who are definitely bisexual. I've got another friend from high school who asexual, aromantic. It's like the weird, the queer congregation that just manages to happen naturally sometimes.
Yeah, no, I've always felt like we find each other without realizing it, because pretty much all of my close friends from high school, like the really close ones, turned out to be queer, like all different types of queer. And like there was even one friend I met through my partner at the time who came out as trans and was the first trans person I'd ever met, like in person. And whenever I first met him, I remember thinking, I was like, there's something about this person where I don't know why, but there's this just kinship, this sense of there's something that's connecting the two of us, you know? And then I come out as trans a few years later and I'm like, that's it, that's why, oh my God, you know? And it's just, that's the coolest thing to me, is like whenever it's like we can just sense each other, you know? Even before, because like I realized I was trans when I was, oh boy, I think it was like when I was 22, 23. Like my entire childhood, I knew there was something really different about me from boys in class. I didn't know what it was, just because the whole idea of being trans was so taboo there that no one talked about it.
Yeah.
I feel like if someone had told me what it meant to be trans when I was like 15 or 16, I would have come out a decade earlier, if not even earlier.
Well, I mean, it would have to be presented in the right way. So, like, the first time
Oh
I
yeah.
found out about anything trans was from the book World According to Garp, which is not good representation since it's a football
If you're in
player,
Texas,
and
they also,
the joke is that it's a football player
Exactly.
who transitioned, and so still like
Yeah.
bald and tall and strong. Focused on. So that didn't
From what I
help.
understand,
And then,
in Texas, you could have been getting the information that, trans people drink the blood of children. Okay,
so they
they're
moved it
just-
from,
I went
Jewish
to church with
people
some
to
people
trans
who
people.
probably believe that.
They moved it from Jewish people to trans people.
Yeah.
But yeah, the other shit. I was gonna say something. No, I lost my train of thought. It was something about whatever. Regardless of what I was gonna say, I'm just gonna bring up another thing I want to say, which was that. I think the reason that people connect is because even the way we talk about things is. Oh no, sorry. Wow, this is gonna. Some people are gonna be pissed about how much I jumped around there, because I remembered what I was originally gonna say, which was that the second thing I saw was a freak show type thing, and while she wasn't bad looking or whatever, there's a certain amount of dissociation from reality. Although my parents, I didn't know. Because of my parents, I didn't associate men with masculinity, so I didn't think about it too much because my parents let me wear makeup and play with Barbie dolls with my sisters, because this is what happens when you have socialist parents who are like, fuck the system. And don't give a fuck. But I still didn't know for sure because they didn't talk about if they would accept me for being trans. But I didn't know until I was early 20 because, like, so, yeah. I've mentioned a different one, but there's the whole easy way for me to think of myself as, like, a het guy obsessed with watching lesbian sex type thing, even though I didn't watch like, I'm gray asexual. I it's not that I watch porn or anything. I just like the idea of it, and also I'm one of the women. But, like, that just ignore that second part. That's not important. I mean, to be fair, I also didn't know what that sort of stereotype would think anyway, since I didn't talk about sex much because I didn't have much interest in sex. But I mean, that also frames conversations, how you talk about things, so it's easier to befriend someone who thinks like you do, and chances are, because the contradictions are more obvious if you're queer, it's, like, easier to talk about things in that sort of framing.
Well, yeah, because in a lot of ways, we're the ones being the most affected by some of these things. I also, it's funny that you brought that up, because I didn't watch porn because it was porn, but, like, lesbian porn fascinated me, and I was always really drawn to it. And I realized years later, I was like, I wanted to be one of the girls. I just didn't realize that's why I liked it so much. And then I was like, wait a minute. Some of my favorite actresses that I have crushes on, I don't have crushes on them. I want to be them. That's like, my egg just like exploded in a million different directions when I had those realizations. And I was like, oh my God,
Yeah, is that the classic, how did I not notice this? For instance,
exactly.
How did I not
it was
notice?
So obvious.
How did I not think, hey, I mean, I can understand how I might repress that sort of thing, but, like, in 6th or 7th grade was when I started reading Ranmo and Half, and I really wished the little water pocket drowned girl was, so I could uh go through that, and then also use nothing but cold showers and whatnot. And that was just sort of like, it seemed like a fantastical reality was, I think, a lot of it, but I didn't think about the fact that those goals might mean something. The fact that I like that might mean something.
Yeah, and it took the longest time for me to separate, like, because again, when you're raised in a religious family, they shame you for having interest in literally anything sexual. So for the longest time, I had to tell myself, hey, your interest in that, you don't need to feel ashamed of that. There's nothing wrong with that. Because I was like, oh, I was interested in porn. I'm a terrible person. God's gonna be so disappointed in me. And it's like, honey, you have desires like any other human being. It's fine. But it's just
well,
it's
depending on the desire, that's gonna change depending on
true. Listen, I don't kink shame, but there's certain things just here and there where I'm like, I'm sorry, you're into what? Like,
oh, I wasn't thinking about a kinks, but you mentioned desires like every other human being, and I'm just like, I'm like, because asexuality and that. Sorry, like my brain is going into the framing of things because it's hard to like get out of some of those habits of ways of talking about things because it's how you were taught about the world, and it's one of those things where it's hard to completely break that, but obviously linguistics matter too to some degree.
Yeah, and like that's one reason I'm trying to work a bit harder this year on trying to take as many ableist terms out of my vocabulary as possible, because I've been working on being more openly autistic, like unmasking more around my partner and closest friends. And they've all been so incredibly supportive of me, and it feels really nice to have those safe spaces. And actually feel like you can be comfortably yourself, and you can, instead of feeling ashamed of this part of yourself, you're okay with it. You can accept it, you can give it love. I've realized so many of us use so many terms that we don't even realize have been used against us. We don't realize that they actually could harm others in that community. It shows how ingrained some of those things are. Like I still hear some of my favorite YouTubers like Anthony Fantano at the Needle Drop. I love his channel. I've been a huge fan of his for like the past 5-6 years because I'm like a music nerd. But he still says like insane and other things like that constantly. And it's one of those things where like, I'm not going to go after someone for that and be like, you terrible person, how dare you? But it just shows that like these words that we believe are completely innocent actually don't have good connotations to them. And part of being like more aware of disabled members of society is being willing to be like, okay, maybe we should work on using these less and just listen to them and ask
well, yeah, and you can always
at least Fantano says transition every
exactly
episode.
He does.
So I thought he was giving me orders. Actually, he used to be quite the right winger for a while. The one thing I found myself being more comfortable about, not so much explaining trans is fairly easy comparatively to explaining autism. I've had to really educate the well, I live with my ex-wife and her fiance, but long thing. I've really had to say, look, this is very frustrating. Yes, I'm going to over-explain stuff. I'm going to talk a lot, but I need to get all of the pieces here. So if you listen to the end, what I'm saying at the end is what I'm saying. So if you just stop listening at the beginning, after you get whatever reply you're looking for, that's not going to be the actual answer. Okay. Well, apparently Tinder agrees.
Yeah, no, the interesting thing about the whole line, you sort of, it's always such a fucking balancing act when it comes to talking about things, when it comes to like the usage of words like crazy or arsler or even normal is at its inherent has an ableist aspect, so you don't know necessarily if people are saying something is average. You don't know if they're saying that or if they're saying this is something that's not broken, that's not wrong, it's normal. I know it's in like I looked at the dictionary definition, and like the second part of the definition, it's just someone who is not mentally or physically disabled. That was, or mentally or physically has some sort of condition. Anyone who doesn't have that sort of thing is normal. And you're essentially saying there's just so many connotations about normal being what you should be expected to be.
I had less problem with terms like crazy than I do with terms like delusion. When people are saying crazy, they just mean disordered and not good. It's a pejorative. But when they're saying delusional, they're saying it as a pejorative, and they're saying they're somehow claiming the ability to make such a diagnosis, and they're putting down anybody who is suffering under those diagnoses, you understand, and coping with them. That I think I have less problem with crazy and more problem with, especially when people are misusing them, the technical terms.
Yeah, I mean, I could agree with that. I think especially if you look at major streamers right now like Vosh, who apparently seems okay with using the R slur. I want to tell him, you have such large audience. I think one part of being a content creator is you have a responsibility not just to your audience, but also to the groups and ideologies that you present and you talk about. I think there is a certain responsibility to present those things in a way where you're not laughing at certain derogatory terms, so being like, you can use that word here and there. It's totally fine. We want to appeal to people on the right. Why not bring them in? And it's like, well, that just encourages more of it, though. And like,
yeah, you don't have to take like the Lib Dem approach to everything.
I feel glad that autistic screeching seems to have made an exit from the discourse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was used constantly whenever I was in high school, and I didn't realize how offensive that was until a few years later. And I was like, honestly, I'm really grateful I never openly said to anyone in high school that I was autistic. I think at that point it was probably fairly obvious because, I was like, there are things people are saying I'm being awkward about. I don't understand. I'm just being me. Help. But I also, about a year ago, I did a video about Richard Dawkins and eugenics, about, sort of his flippant use of eugenicist terms, seeming to, support certain eugenicist things. And whenever I was doing the research for it, I don't remember the name of the researcher offhand, but there was a quote unquote psychologist from, I want to say, the early 1800s, who was one of the pioneers of seeing disabled people as not being worthy of carrying on children. He basically believed that those people, the bloodlines needed to stop there. They shouldn't be allowed to reproduce. And he was the one who actually came up with a lot of ableist terms that people use nowadays. So it's like, I think it's good to have that awareness, that a lot of these words are actually rooted in a very well-known eugenicist who wanted to see people like us basically bred out of existence. I think it's important, to have context of things. And even if we say, certain words were a little less harsh on than others, I think it's just good to understand in general, like where those things come from. So if you have people who don't want any of them used, period, we can be more understanding of why they feel that way, because, we'd be affected by the same thing, instead of being like, well, it's just a word. Why are you being so sensitive? It's just a word. Well, no word is just a word. There's always
Yeah.
going to be meaning attached to it.
Yeah, it always carries a variety of connotations, and most ableist terminology carries the connotation that you are not as good if you're not able. But it's centered around the essential claim of a person's worth is what they can produce.
Mm-hmm.
It's based so fundamentally on that. So if you can't produce as much in society, based off of whatever way you're going to even describe producing something, because I mean, obviously, I'm producing content and I'm not getting paid much for it. And it's just.
I need to interrupt for about 2 seconds.
Okay.
If you can hear, if you can hear me. I'm having a very bad problem with my internet connection. The router, we're supposed to have it looked at, but somebody in the next room are using up what little bandwidth we can pull out of our router, and that's why I keep flashing off.
Okay.
I'm going to make you host, and what I will do is just do my ending thing. Make host. Okay. And your life matters, your voice matters, and you matters. Okay. I'm sorry to skip out. I will watch the rest of it.
Yeah, and you can always find Christy on the Flute Voice and Rainbow Shelter News, and you
Be
can
sure and check out the doobly-doo.
check out Christy's channel. It should be down in the description. And Chris Abbey Music is Christy without the TY. It was your music YouTube that you probably made. I assume you made before transitioning or some weird shit like that. And you couldn't get the channel
yes,
name
there's
changed.
a lot of me as a guy in there.
Yeah, but
okay,
it's also music.
Yeah.
All right, take care, Christy. Nice meeting you.
All right.
Yeah.
It's nice meeting you. I'll Twitter you what I was gonna ask earlier. Okay, bye.
So there. Shit, I lost my train of thought now.
Okay, perfect time for me to swoop in with.
Okay.
At CPAC, they had a golden idol of Trump.
Oh God, yes.
That's the most.
They do not understand the irony.
Thing.
Not only that, they had a tacky, kind of hideous golden idol of Trump.
There's so
without
much
any sense of irony. It's just.
Yeah. I saw a meme that just perfectly captured this, where it was Noah coming down the mountain with the 10 Commandments. And in the valley is a giant Trump golden calf and Trump supporters all around praising Trump. And Noah's just like, what the fuck? Like, it's so perfect. Like, yeah. It absolutely, it amazes me, but at the same time, it really makes perfect sense, because I'm like, he's a literal cult of personality. Like, yeah. He's literally made a cult to where they're idolizing him in this form. And I'm just like, do they not realize that this is giving us endless ammunition? Like, are they not aware of how ridiculous this is all becoming? Like, it actually feels like Idiocracy became their textbook for how to build society. Like, they looked at that and they were like, yes, this couldn't possibly be a parody. This will lead to the greatest awakening of knowledge and power that Western civilization has ever seen. And there's just not one moment does the thought ever enter their heads of like, are we the baddies? Is this like like no, never entertain that thought. It's just it really is something to me that this is sort of what a big part of the GOP base is becoming. The fact that like they're becoming more about like performativeness. They're honestly, they're a lot like the debate bro crowd online, where it's like they like someone who badmouths other people. They don't really care about substance. They don't care about facts. They're just like, yeah, he reflects our bigotries. He sounds like us. Yeah, and it's just like at foam at the mouth for it.
Yeah.
Of the people who were attending CPAC, people who paid money to go to a love fest for Trump, okay, 55% favored him as a candidate. That's his highest. He's never broken 50% before, you know. But this is people you have just and 55%, but 95% like his policies, his political policies. And you go, there are no political policies. All he does is say, he just talks about hate. And this sort of thing. He doesn't ever. There's no he has never had any political policies. This was his huge failure as a president. Is he had no policy.
And if you look at, I don't know how long it was before he ran for president, but there were photos of him with the Clintons, and like he was close friends with the Clintons. But then when he runs for president, it's very much about showmanship. He would insult Hillary. He'd be extremely openly sexist. Even like, I can't get over this clip every time I see it. Whenever he's like standing behind Hillary, just staring at her, and I'm like, "What are you doing? That is creepy as fuck, man."
Oh, that was at the debates. He got up out of his chair and wandered around. And when the camera was on Hillary, because it's her time and she's supposed to be talking, and he's wandering around behind her, staring at her.
Yeah.
What kind of crazy behavior is this?
See, already utilizing some of the ableism there, Perfict. Tisk.
Well, that's like I said, crazy is I'm not going to be calling it as I'm saying what type of, why?
It just makes me think that, like, you could hear someone saying, "Uh-oh, Grandpa got out of his chair and he's wandering. Someone please sit him down. Please sit him down. He's making weird faces at the camera. Grandpa, your chair's right there. Sit down."
Yeah, and I want to bring up. I know. I was just randomly thinking. Like, I like Idiocracy. My one critique is the underlying eugenics tone to the fact that it's about, oh, the poor people are breeding too much. And the rich, educated people aren't like having enough children. And it's just like, that's not great. But at the same time, you have the best president ever. Because he actually gets people who are experts, or the closest things to experts in the field, and tries to figure out ways to remove, the most amount of harm.
Well, that's what I used to, okay, that's but when left with a economy that was literally in free fall and expected to crater and cause a massive collapse that would ripple throughout the world, causing further collapses, Obama took over that administration, and he talked to economists and then did what they said. Actually, he kicked it to Joe Biden, and that was what Joe Biden said to do, and that's what they did. They just talked to the economists, and then they did what they said.
And to be fair, Joe Biden was also, if I recall correctly, the one pushing more for LGBTQ rights by the time it was the Obama administration.
I'm not sure if that wasn't theater, but yes, he was the one who did the push.
Yeah, part of me would think that part of it is theater. I don't know if y'all have read it, but there's a book called Yesterday's Man that is a beautifully done analysis of his career that shows how he is responsible for like the prison industrial complex being the way it is nowadays. He's the reason why the military industrial complex was boosted to the point where it's as big and just bloated as it is. He's the reason for like so many problems in society that it doesn't surprise me. Like I could see Obama going up and going, my fellow Americans, I come to you today to thank you for voting me as your next president. I come to tell you today that our campaign promises need to be put on hold because there's war, and war is bad. Wouldn't you agree, fellow Americans? And it's just this same thing where, like, they'll say whatever they want to get elected. Like Biden, whenever he first started his career, he fought for environmental rights. He fought for fair wages. He was actually like is somewhat like Bernie is now ideologically, but as soon as he gained his first seat in a city council and then moved up from there, you saw this transition where he suddenly starts siding more and more with big businesses. He suddenly starts siding more and more with wealthy CEOs and powerful corporations, and his attention just starts turning further and further away from the public, the very people who are responsible for putting him there in the first place. And whenever I first read about his history of highly racist and sexist comments, I was just like, you know, there's some things that suddenly make a lot of sense about him. And it's amazing to me that there were people, whenever they voted for him, who fell for the propaganda hook, line, and sinker of Trump. Trump is this ahistorical threat to the country. He's the worst president ever. And if he's voted in for another term, America as we know it will end. We must vote him out. But I'm also like, didn't you do the same thing for Bush and Reagan and other presidents before that? Y'all seem to keep using the same narrative of, no, it's this president that will end America. It's this president who will lead to the end of the world. You must vote for our candidate. Otherwise, everything you know will end. And then that candidate gets voted in, and it turns out to be more of the same, just with different packaging. Interesting. And that cycle continues over and over again. And I think it really speaks to how good the media propaganda was this time. The fact that so many people bought, you know, the hashtag Never Trump campaign, and they were like, no, we have to get him out of office because who knows what's going to happen if he's allowed to stay for 4 more years.
Well, I mean, obviously there was, you know, the various Trump.
Well, I'm
Trump
totally
was
done.
more
I was
openly
in favor of
fascist than any other candidate, and honestly, if he got elected, I don't know if he wanted the equivalent of pink triangles.
Oh God, no!
If you're
Yeah,
LGBTQ. I mean, Trump fought for special identification that you had to mention if you're trans, effectively. So, like,
yeah, it's like a double-edged sword, you know. Like you realize that regardless of who's voted in, it's gonna be shitty. We're gonna be dealing with so many terrible things when it comes from like the housing market to the way we're treated in medical care to jobs to education to social relations. Like everything is, you know, so fundamentally broken. And you look at the two-party system and you're like, you know, they might be small variations on each other, but we're realizing, like, no matter who we vote in, it's going to be shitty all around.
Well, you see, now it's going to be shitty, and you say no matter who we vote in. But like I was saying, I was in favor of Biden on the better than Trump.
Yeah.
Okay, and I don't mean that as in cyanide is better than hemlock because it is a quicker and less painful death. I'm saying that it's.
So you're not an accelerationist, is what I'm hearing.
It's better, you know, and so on, and going, you know, well, Trump is the proof of, you can't just say, you know, well, it doesn't matter who we elect. It's always going to keep getting these placating things where it's playing off against you. You go, no, it matters. It matters. We can actually do worse. We could probably do worse than Trump if we really let ourselves try. We might get a chance in, you know, future elections. But the point is that, yeah, if you elect a criminal to office, you get bad results.
Yeah, but like we need to. It's one of those things where, I mean, my attitude was just I might find it difficult to protest in a camp, was my reasoning for Trump, and Trump was doing stuff to try to get fought several times to try to get lists of disabled people and try to make, you know, being trans show identification and a lot of things which are very much lead ups to
Yes, to having to wear a T
Holocaust
on your
stuff.
clothing. Yes.
See, that's
it's
that's
too
one of
close.
those things where I'm like, in a lot of ways, I am fundamentally against electoralism, but only because the system currently in place, you know, electoralism only gives us really so much push. And like, what pushed me to this position was I did a lot of studying on the early Democratic Party, especially from the early 1900s, where at the time there was this massive push for unionization. Things like socialism and communism actually had tremendous support in the country. And what the Democratic Party did is they stepped in and they started co-opting some of these movements, but they made them more what they call palatable, but it's essentially defanging them. It's removing the more radical elements of those movements and getting it so that way they can start pulling people away from those movements and absorbing them into the Democratic Party, essentially weakening their power over time until you get to a point where it's more just like it's window painting, you know, or window shopping. It's something where there's this sort of allure of like, oh, they seem so progressive. They seem like they're doing just a good job, but a lot of it is just theater. They and the Republicans together have constructed this certain Overton window of American politics. And anytime something happens that sits outside that window, that's something that threatens their accumulation of capital, it threatens their concentration of power, and it threatens the system itself that they've built. So what they're going to do is they're going to look at that and they're like, okay, so that movement can't be allowed to build. We can't allow that to gain power because then it's going to present an actual threat to us. So what can we do to make it seem to a lot of people who aren't, you know, studied up on how American politics work? How can we make it seem like we're actually on their side, but like reduce the ability of these movements to actually make a difference? Well, they'll take on some of the characteristics of those movements and be like, yeah, we should fight for fair wages. We should fight for the rights of minorities. Absolutely. We should definitely fight for queer rights. But what they end up doing instead is they don't address the root causes of why these movements started in the first place.
Yeah.
They don't address what it is these movements are critiquing. It's very much this aesthetic of progressivism that is really all it is. And they use that to continue taking power away from the parties over and over again. And even with recent protests, we're seeing it happen all over again, where they're like, yeah, no, we should definitely do better about the police. And then within a year, all the Democrats completely dropped it. And it's this thing where I think in certain cases, like what happened with last year's election, I'm not going to attack someone for voting Biden because I think attacking someone for something like that is so fundamentally counterproductive to what it is we're trying to do. But I do think that now is a really good time for us to sort of start reframing the discussion and saying, well, here's the thing. Regardless of which party is voted in, there's only a certain range of things that are going to happen. And very, very, very few of those things are going to be even remotely beneficial to the people. And as long as these two parties remain in place and they have the power that they do and they continue operating the same way functionally, very little is going to change. It's like Biden was like, nothing will fundamentally change. I think now's a really good time to, you know, have people start educating themselves. Like I hear a lot of people badmouth theory, and I'm like, okay, but the thing about theory is that's how you understand the foundations of this ideology. And it's still very, very prescient and relatable to things happening nowadays. And I think at the very least, you know, encourage people to read it, you know, so they can gain that understanding, that contextualization for like why these things are important.
So two things. One is it's one of those things where I just think that because protests need to continue, riots need to continue, everything needs to there needs to be a genuine threat of I know I've talked about this. There actually does need to be a potential threat of violence for any action to actually get done, because they aren't going to elect they're not going to do anything through directly through the electoral system. And yes, they will try to co-op things, but on the other hand, a lot of fascist stuff goes so subtly that I didn't want my voice taken. The last thing I want is my voice taken away, and
Same.
and I was concerned that Trump might move towards actions that do that, and as he subtly moves towards that, he's going to
No, what would make you think that?
Whatever. I have a sense of self-preservation. That's the only reason I didn't. That is the only reason I voted for Biden, is because I was genuinely concerned about the direct and about there being a potential move towards direct and immediate threats, and I don't think most people are going to I don't think most people are going to do anything about, because I don't think there's been enough community involvement. And as for theory, theory's a mixed bag, because like, I mean, so it's not like I've read no aspect of theory. I read some of the fuck, I can't think of his name. The guy who did the who fought for the Irish social revolution, because he's got like a good breakdown of the problems with nationalism or whatnot. But I also know that when it comes to people trying to survive, that having the time to read a lot of theory is not something that's going to necessarily happen, and sometimes that gets used to dismiss points even if they're good points. There's a potential class thing to it being theory being put above. There are certain people who put theory above like the actual things that theory teaches, and just be like, oh, I follow a movement because of or I refer to myself by a movement specifically because of what was some of the things presented in these books or whatnot, and it can come off, depending on the person, like they don't actually care about the end goal part as much as they care about the philosophical part. It's like, I'm philosophically right, but like, because like I understand all this theory. It's like, cool. I don't want to be homeless. What can I do to help deal with that?
Yeah, it's one of those things where I hate the people who are like, oh, you haven't read theory, then you can't be a real leftist. It's just like, number one, shut the fuck up. But like, I think my method is that I think theory and then action together, that's what's the most effective. And like, I don't think necessarily you have to read like volume after volume after volume of theory, because like, have you seen how big Karl Marx's Capital is? Who has the time to sit down and read that all the way through? Get out of here. But like, I do think it is a good approach of sort of figuring out like what are the most key texts, and kind of making that like the firm bedrock of what you're doing. Because like, for example, I am a member of the DSA chapter in Portland. And actually my partner and I both are members. Funnily enough, she's also a YouTuber, which is how I met her. So we have like the coolest love story ever.
Oh.
And she's amazing. I could brag about her all day. But so we're both
you
members.
said someone who's also a YouTuber. What sort of content does she use? Can we get her on this channel as well?
She's another left YouTuber. She does things that are more strictly in like the Marxist-Leninist vein, but she has a series she does where it's book studies, and she'll have like 4 or 5 other YouTubers get together, and they'll be assigned chapters of a book, and they'll do these bi-weekly like streams where they'll discuss the book together, what they read. They'll go into like deeper analysis of it. And I love the idea of that, of getting people more involved in like reading together, and you all discuss the readings, you apply them to things happening nowadays. And to circle back to us being a part of the DSA, this is something that she and I are both encouraging the members to do. Is we're saying, I think what we should do is we should make education like a really core part of what we're doing. You know, figure out texts we can read together, make sort of a charter for our chapter that has basic principles that we do not budge from. I think doing that over time is going to be really, really good for us, because if you have a movement that's very set in its beliefs and it doesn't budge from those beliefs, that's going to give you so much more weight. That's going to give you so much more mobility, because people understand more what it is you stand for, and they know you're willing to stand by those things, especially whenever the rest of society starts applying pressure to you. They know that you're not going to fold. And that's really important for us right now. So that's something that she and I are both working on, trying to encourage the people there to, you know, we're like, hey, we have some book ideas. Let's talk about book ideas. Are there any things is there something y'all would be interested in studying? Is there something y'all would be interested in reading? Let's get together. Let's talk about it. Let's hash it out. And it's really cool, because like we're seeing a lot of interest from everyone there. And I'm like, see, even just little things like that, that's such a good way to get started, because you're making everyone want to be a part of it, you know?
2 things.
Yeah.
Because we are getting close to ending time. Arguably, we're moving a little bit past, but I mean, to be fair, it is a pre-record, so it's not like the biggest deal. It's not like I have raid in a video game right after this.
Yeah.
That's what happens all the time. Normally on the show, but James Connolly's Socialism and Irish Nationalism. It talks about it's very small. See, I do read a little bit of theory, just a little. But like it talks about the way to break down the view of nations. To like, if we view America more like a culture and less like a sort of, you know, undefinable thing that needs to be, you know, made strong, and you know, we need all the people to breed children to enforce the army so that we can have a strong nation. You know,
hope to link to that in the doobly-doo or comments or whatever.
No, I'd be really interested to read that at some point, because that's one part of history I've been really curious about for the longest time, is sort of especially like with Irish nationalism, everything that happened with them from like the 1800s to the 1950s. That's like big influence that I was talking about.
I'm going to recommend someone who does Twitch streams and YouTube. His name goes on the internet as Zanzi, ZAHNZEE.
He and I have done streams together.
Oh yeah,
yes,
no,
lovely human
That's
being.
where I found you. I found you off Zanzi's thing. Why?
Yeah, we did.
That's where I found.
We did a stream together. It was like last June or July, sometime in there.
Yeah, no, it was not too long after the stream I did with him.
Yeah.
No, he's a wonderful person to talk with, and he's the one who recommended recommended James Connolly and Socialism and Irish Nationalism, and it's short, but it's like really clear and well written, and it breaks down the weird aspects of nationalism and the important thing, just trying to get people away from the sort of nationalistic idea that we have where it matters how good America is, or I mean, every country does this to some degree. I mean,
well,
we are
just
number
on
one for COVID deaths and prison population. I believe we're still
frequently
number one for that.
When talking with people, you end up with the problem of they go, if you don't have capitalism, how does that work? How would it work? Conceptualizing how it would work is very difficult. But I've found good success with pointing out to them, that doesn't matter. It does work. See, we can show you in the studies, it does work. Even if you don't understand how, you don't know how your phone works, it does work. That's what you know about it. That's what you know about most of the things in your life. Even if you don't understand how it works, it will still work.
Well, I mean, so like, but I mean, the other problem with it when it comes to people's concern about trying new things is it's just like, they're all like, well, we're only familiar with capitalism. Why would we use anything from any other system? It's like, well, I mean,
for the same reason you don't have a landline.
Yeah, but I mean, also like, we didn't when COVID came and spread throughout. Was created, or not was created. Fuck, I'm tired. Once it spread, eventually, as diseases do, nobody had a cure. We didn't know what the cure was. So what did we do? We figured out something to do the cure. We figured out stuff. We had advice on things that experts said that would actually help. Unfortunately, that advice was not followed in America much. South Korea, much better at following that
like
advice.
Science is good. Like, hey, y'all know gravity works. You know how gravity got figured out? Science. So how is it you don't see anybody who's like, gravity doesn't exist? Here, I'll show you. And we're all just like, good luck with that. How are y'all totally
Well, I'm
fine
sure
with
there's
that?
someone.
Like, you look at COVID and you're just like, no, it can't be. It's just the flu. The scientists lie. Just like, what?
Yeah. Anyways,
amazing.
Sorry, we should be wrapping up. Perfict, because you're the quickest. Where can people find you?
The Rumpus Room Discord, and I do this.
Okay.
That's my social media exposure right there.
Alice, where can people find you?
So y'all can find me on Twitter, Alice_Evelyn_, and my YouTube channel is just Alice Evelyn. I'm planning on getting into Twitch later in the year, but I need to get myself a proper webcam. A few other things first, but I'm hoping to like properly get involved. But yeah.
Yeah, I need to sort out living situation and survival situation before I get into Twitch, and then I can have a more interesting Twitch presence. It has
I love the
declined
community,
heavily.
but
oh god,
at least the people I found are good. Like Lumiru, and like other lefty streamers. Emily the Possum Queen, love her to death.
I'm just used to when you're small, you get the transphobic people popping into stream, and it's just like, oh yeah, that's a banhammer.
Oh yeah, like whenever Destiny sent a bunch of his community after me, that was fun.
Ooh, yeah, no, that happened with a friend of mine who, whatever. I have disagreements with Savaris, but some political related stuff. But that said, all Savaris did was critique the fact that Destiny has terrible movie opinions. It's objectively true. But,
I was about to say, yeah, it doesn't take much to see. Like,
yeah, Savaris actually helped me with getting better movie opinions at in channels. Like, I'm wandering off again. I'm gonna say that to after show we can talk a little bit more. You can find me Ozma in the Dark everywhere. You can find me here on the Fluid Voice every week, as well as Rainbow Shelter News, where we do a little bit of news and commentary about like queer news. I'm suddenly reminded of the original title I wanted to go for, which was Queer News That You Can Use, but at the same time, Christy pointed out the fact that YouTube kind of goes hard on the queer being used, so I didn't want the channel shut down. Was the reason I didn't choose that, but that's generally been the mentality. And I'm going to be doing clips here, and everywhere else is just a giant nebulous mess at the moment, because I'm going to be taking a break from Twitch because I'm trying to sort out life stuff, and life stuff's complicated. And on that note, your voice matters, your life matters, and you matter. I'm saying it anyways. I know Christy says it, and I know I asked if I could borrow that thing, but I like it for an ending.
Yep.
Bye.
It's a good outro. Peace.